One of the things that drives executives nuts is not actually knowing what's going on in their organizations. Sure, we've got all sorts of software and dashboards and goal keeping, but a lot of it is the qualitative things or the things that are over the horizon, shaking in the bushes. And the higher up you go, the harder it is for people to be straight with you. And most leaders think, gosh, we have a people problem. But in reality, it's a culture and systems problem. It's a safety problem. And people are worried more than ever about keeping their jobs, and they're under so much pressure to perform and get things done and to move faster. Now, today's guest we're bringing on the lift comes from a backstory and direction you probably haven't heard. Tom Hardin was a rising hedge fund analyst here in New York City in his 20s, making a lot of money, and all of a sudden he made a few trades with insider information.
I could still think of myself as a good guy, Ben. Like, I'm, Tom from Georgia, married a devout Catholic. Now I'm going to church. Now I'm being a good Catholic on Sunday. That was out the door when I got to work.
And then the FBI caught him. And they gave him a choice. Tom, you can cooperate or you can face prison. So over 18 months, he became Tipper X, a covert informant in the Operation Perfect Hedge, which was the largest insider trading investigation in U.S. history. He wore a wire. Yeah, the kind you see in movies and TV, more than 40 times, and over 20 convictions followed. And in the process, he learned something that no management book or MBA course can teach us: how to get people to tell you the truth when they've been hiding something. And not through force or interrogation or through authority or threat, but through patience, presence, and what he calls third meeting honesty. That moment when people finally say the thing that they've been holding back, when they finally name that elephant in the room. And today, we're talking about the darkest thing he learned and turning that into the most useful thing that you can learn about getting people to be open and honest with you and keeping their relationship stable.
There's a saying like the cover up is worse than the crime or the mistake. And so you have to have that culture where people can raise their hand, admit mistakes, and learn from those, and you're not going to be penalized.
Welcome to The Lift, the show about leadership, growth, and getting what we want. I'm your host, Ben Brooks. Tom, I'd love to start with you in Manhattan on 8th Avenue. I believe you're walking to work, and then someone called you by your name. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so it was July 2008, 6:30 in the morning, leaving my apartment in Manhattan to drop off some dry cleaning. And I hear somebody behind me say, "Are you Thomas Covey Hardin?" And Ben, the last time I heard my full name was my mother back in Georgia, and it wasn't a good day for me if I heard that. And I turned around, it wasn't Mom. It was two FBI agents, male and female, straight out of Central Casting, wallets out, FBI. We sat down at a Wendy's next to the dry cleaner, and they started interrogating me about stock trades that I had made on inside information. And so they said they knew where I was the previous weekend back in Georgia, visiting my baby nephew for his baptism. They knew his name. So they showed they were on to me. I never made any stories up, didn't try to change it, didn't try to make excuses. I said, yes, I made those trades. They would let me know they were building a major set of insider trading cases on Wall Street. We'll get into it, but I was a small sort of minnow, and they were going to use me to try to get two great whales, we could call them. I said, should I talk to a lawyer first? And they said, we'll let you know when you can do that. And then I walked out, went to work.
For folks that are listening that maybe have heard the headline or the words insider trading, can you explain what insider trading is in plain English?
So it's buying or selling a stock on information that's non-public. So if you receive information from a corporate executive or a friend who works at a law firm who might know about a transaction coming up, anything that's not public, it has to be material. So if that information were public, it would move the stock price. So as an example, if I walk into Starbucks in my town, New Jersey, and the manager tells me about the sales that they're going to make that month, it doesn't move the stock price. But if I flew to Seattle and had golf with Howard Schultz and he said, hey, we're going to have this for our quarterly earnings number, that's material and non-public. So that's what it is. It can come from anywhere, corporate executives, friends that work at public companies, kind of anybody can be in the crosshairs of insider trading who might be getting this information. So it's not just people who work on Wall Street and hedge funds.
One of the most, sort of pedestrian cases was Martha Stewart. Some claim she was,
Right.
Sort of singled out, et cetera. But when you have insider trading, you know more than the rest of the market. So it's not a fair market.
Right.
So you made these trades. How much money did you make from these?
So personally, on the four trades, I personally made $46,000. So not 46 million.
46,000. The cost of like a decent car, right? Yeah.
Exactly. At 29 years old. So I blew up my career, kind of professional suicide, at 29 for $46,000. So you think about the opportunity cost, years and years later of not being able to work in the same industry, very costly.
This $46,000, that went into your checking account, or where did that money go?
It just was in the hedge fund. So I worked at a hedge fund. I was a small piece of the partnership. So on the four trades, my piece of the profits was $46,000, but I never even thought about the money. I didn't even know that was the number until the SEC came into my case a few years after the FBI, and they said, "Can you write us a check for $46,000?" And I thought, wow, that's my whole career.
Was that a lot of money to you, like a difference maker, or was that not a huge difference?
It would not, even then at 29 in my 20s, it would not have been a difference maker. And so I was probably making, $500,000 a year in compensation. So that's not going to move the needle.
What had you do them? Like, did people at your company say, hey, go do this thing? Clearly, you had this information on these various trades from these various companies, but what was the driving force to, were you underperforming? Are you trying to keep your job, or what was going on?
Yeah, so I'll set up the situation. And as I set it up, I want to make the point that, cheating is a choice. And I told myself, if it seems like everybody's doing it, but you do choose to cross the line, so that's not an excuse. But I'll set up that 20 years ago, insider trading was rampantly happening in the hedge fund industry. So where I was working, firms would get this information, trade on it, make millions of dollars, and they had status. Like that was the end group in my industry. And as a young professional, I think I was very insecure because I was not in that group. I was actually staying on the right track at Georgia at Penn, like picking stocks the right way. One thing happened that was very pivotal in my career. At my final hedge fund where I worked, we were investing over a 1 to 3 year horizon. My best idea, Ben, that I never saw come to fruition was after Google went public. I told my boss, all right, we have to own Google. There was still 8 yellow page companies in the world that were worth together like $30 billion. I said, this is going away. I mean, we're not going to use these anymore. That's the only insight you need in this career to make your career, just one idea. We were creating positions for those longer term ideas, but we lost money in the first quarter. My boss comes into my office, closes the door, and says, actually, now we have to start making money every month. From 1 to 3 years to monthly, like the KPI, like shrinking that much, and me not asking the boss any clarifying questions. So are we going to stay within the legal or ethical guardrails? I didn't ask that question. One more big thing happened. He then allowed me to buy a stock in our portfolio and not have to talk to him as long as it was less than 1% of the funds we manage, like a small position. So if I got an idea, I could buy a little bit. If it helped us, it would help us out. And that was a big change in controls in the company.
1%. Well, how large was the fund? What was 1% in absolute dollars, roughly?
So the fund was $100 million, so $1 million position. So I could buy up to, $1 million of stock in the portfolio without having to talk to him.
He changed your job entirely. Like, it was like you were playing one sport and you played now an entirely different sport with a different scoreboard. Is that right?
Yeah, there was a massive change in goals. There's always short-termism in finance,
Sure.
but it really crept in where now we have to make money every month. And as I shared this story, like ambiguity is really the enemy. People could start making rationalizations, as we'll talk about with me, but that was a big part of it, the change in goals.
Did you know in the moment it felt a little sketchy?
It did a little bit, and because he knows what's happening in the industry, he knows what our competition is doing. I mean, we're talking about it. We're saying, can you believe this hedge fund bought this stock and it just got taken over by another company like a few days later? Like it's rampantly going on. And so then I think he intended to give me this sort of carte blanche with, don't tell me how you're doing it, 1%, we'll leave it there. The 4 trades happened over 7 months. After every trade, which were around like either earnings announcements or they were corporate M&A, which is not disclosed to the public beforehand, every time the stocks are up a lot, the first time, but I thought he was going to fire me. Like, oh gosh, he's going to know. And he said, hey, don't tell me how you're doing this or keep me out of it. So again, that willful blindness to my illicit conduct was a huge part that kind of kept me going after the first time. The right boss would have said, what the heck? You're fired. I'm going to call the SEC. I'm going to try to work it out with them. I have a nefarious employee. By him looking the other way, it just fueled that fire in my head because he's my mentor, not the best mentor, but in my 20s,
Sure.
this guy's my mentor. He's looking the other way. I'm surprised we didn't escalate it to beyond 1%, like that we kept them all small here. But I think it was just enough for him to be like, I don't know, keep me out of it. And so these small positions.
And did you ever think you'd get busted other than that
Never.
time? Yeah, so these were like relatively small gains. They were kind of in the wash under the 1%. He authorized you to do that.
Yeah, and the woman calling me with the tips is another investor I knew, but I suspected she had been doing this for years, and it turns out she had been doing this. It was a sealed case before, and so the main billionaire they took down was a Sri Lankan guy named Rajaratnam, and she's like, he's making millions doing this, and so it further fueled like, this is how this guy's making his money. She's finally sharing these tips with me. If he's making millions, I'll make small 1% trades. The 4 trades added up to maybe 1.2 million. So it wasn't like the millions and millions of dollars that people were making. And when she calls me and I place the trades and my boss says nothing, it just further fueled the stories in my head I kept telling myself. So when an employee crosses that line, there's often major rationalizations, the stories we can tell ourselves, self-deception by reasoning. Everybody does it. The big one is I'll do it one time and never do it again. It's never one time, especially when you're not reprimanded. I could still think of myself as a good guy, Ben. Like I'm, Tom from Georgia, married a devout Catholic. Now I'm going to church. Now I'm being a good Catholic on Sunday, but then, that was out the door when I got to work. But and I shared this idea of like a moral ledger, like the scorecard where we have debits and credits. And I told myself, I'm just such a great guy that 4 trades, we make thousands of trades a year. Like 4 trades isn't so bad. And so that's the scorecard in our head, like that moral ledger we can keep.
High level, you then help out the FBI by wearing a wire, Wired on Wall Street, the name of your book. So over what period of time did you wear a wire and how many people in total, just to kind of size this thing for people?
I sort of tried to make a deal with the FBI. So I got them a list of names. And so we started concocting like how I would meet these people through other hedge fund analysts. I would get introductions. I would meet people at conferences. And then my job was to get them talking about illicit trades they had made in the past so I could get them talking about that and record it. The recording device was about an inch or two big, fit my front dress shirt pocket. But there was really no training at all. So I would go into these meetings at first. I was very sloppy. I would fly to Silicon Valley, meet face-to-face with the guy at Starbucks, and say, nice to meet you. And I would cut to the chase very quickly. So remember 3 years ago when you made those trades, what would you say? And of course, they would shut me down. And I felt like, oh my gosh, the wire is about 2 feet big on my chest. And so the FBI would listen to it later and say, you're doing a terrible job. And I said, hey, it's my first time doing this. never had training. And so they gave me one piece of advice: ask the question and say nothing, like the classic negotiation tactic, let the silence talk.
Were you anxious that someone was going to, scream at you, or are you wearing a wire, rip your shirt open like we see in the movies or in TV?
Yeah, there was a few instances where there was a guy high up the FBI's list who had probably gotten 20 conversations. He would always change the subject, so he was a hard nut to crack. I know he was on to me. One Sunday afternoon, he's like, we have to have dinner tonight. And he lived out in Connecticut. I lived in New York. I told the FBI. They met me at Grand Central train station, gave me the wire. I took the train out to Connecticut. He picks me up at the train station, and he says, Tom, good to see you. I brought swim trunks for you. We're going swimming at my mother's house. And the final season of Sopranos was going that summer. So all these ideas were going through my head. I played it cool. We went to this house, and he wants to see if it's taped to my chest. I went to the restroom, took the wire up, put it in my jeans, put these swim trunks on. We get to the pool. He said, have you been approached by the SEC? And truthfully, I'd say, no, not the SEC. And he starts making implicating statements about all those questions I'd asked him about. Obviously, it wasn't recorded in the pool. This guy, one of the worst actors, was never charged.
So, you have to get people to open up. You mentioned the third meeting honesty. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it was a 3-meeting dance. At the first meeting, hey, catch up. Here's who I am. Look, and my cover story was always, I'm looking for a job, and then can we get a meeting? The second meeting, normalizing the illicit behavior was very important as I got through this. Like, cue them with subtle statements. Hey, God, I had like those 4 trades last year. The market's tough, but when it comes back, I'm sure I'm going to have more ideas. I had to make sure that the guy was also insider trading, so it wasn't so off-putting. So aligning it and normalizing it. And then by the third meeting, maybe a few weeks later, would be a dinner, hopefully, where there's some wine going. And then I'd say kind of upfront a little bit, like, how do you do it? Like these four stocks, you trade perfectly every quarter. Like, I'm just curious how you do it. Oh, by the third meeting, hey Tom, we got a contact at a law firm or something that's with the information. And then I'd purposely say like, oh, is it like a big firm like this company, or the person always wants to correct you? And so they say, no, small firm. Like, oh, okay. And then by the end of dinner, 30 minutes goes by, just come back to that conversation. So small firm, like, and try to get as much as I could. And so the echo and extract. So I have a whole framework. It's in the book, the TRACE framework. And I was told later that like CIA agents actually go through this training to get targets to talk, to elicitation, verbal mirroring, that type of thing. So I have this whole framework for how to do that, how to get information for people.
You mentioned also the kind of the 10-80-10 in terms of three buckets of people, right? And there was 10% of people who are, people you cannot corrupt, 80% of people you could be swayed, and 10% of people who show up corrupt or rotten. Explain us through that framework and what happens with that 80, because that really seems like the opportunity.
Yeah, so it's 10, 10, 80. There's different frameworks for thinking about culture, but I like this one. So yeah, 10% are your Girl Scouts, your Boy Scouts, always going to toe the line. It's other 10% who might be privy to bending the rules, pushing the line, that type of thing, more so than others. What 10% dominates? It's not so much like the tone at the top. That's such an overused term. It's like the actual behaviors that get rewarded. Like of the 10% are people that sort of bend the rules to get ahead, the highest people comped, or is there a part of their comp or people that get ahead who actually are doing it the right way? And so what people see get rewarded is the actual culture. And I think it's just sometimes like, oh, what we say is the culture. Like, no, it's what people see. It's behaviors that people believe will put them ahead. And so the 80% could be swayed toward the right line or the wrong line, depending on what gets incentivized or what gets rewarded.
And I do remember a story that I read a long time ago. Alan Mulally had left Boeing and went to Ford to be the CEO. And Ford was hemorrhaging, I don't know, $15 billion a year, I think. But yet every status chart in a red, yellow, green, everything was green.
Yeah.
Finally, someone put up a chart and said, hey, this product line is red and the production is red. And he said, thanks for the visibility on this. He said, who can go help Mark Fields was the guy at the time who later became another executive. And so it started to change the culture because it made it okay to share bad news that they actually visibly saw. This person wasn't punished. In fact, that person got promoted and supported, but that was a real culture change. And he's spoken in the media a lot about that. That's a different form of reward, right? Which is support or air cover or safety. What are the things that managers or leaders could do to help people speak up rather than resist it?
And so many industries do this. Like you have to speak up, and it's almost like they make the employee feel like they have to be courageous when we're not even talking about whistleblowing, or that's a whole different issue. But we're just talking about raising concerns. So I think, hey, the beginning of the meeting, Monday meeting, juniors, raise your concerns. Having some vulnerability as a leader. Like, I don't know everything. I know I'm the leader, but I want your input. And so speak up that way. Or if there's misconduct issues, that type of thing, it's okay to speak up or come to the office, that type of thing. Not just having more vulnerability as a leader. It's so often sometimes where the leader had some of their own doing in whatever happened, but they didn't own it. And so you have to, as a leader, just say, okay, here's what went wrong. Here was my part in it. Now we're going to, see everybody else's part in it too. And then you get people speaking up. I think sometimes people are, like you said, are afraid to do it. If you have a culture where people don't own their mistakes, you're going to get some misconduct or something happening down the road. In some industries, obviously, like airlines are the best at doing it because mistakes are fatal, but other industries could be better. Do we want people to actually raise their hand? If we tell them not to raise their hand, they're going to cover it up. And there's a saying like the cover up is worse than the crime or the mistake. And so you have to have that culture where people can raise their hand, admit mistakes, and learn from those. And you're not going to be penalized. In the book I wrote too, I talked about mistakes versus bad decisions. Like for myself, I made bad decisions, not mistakes, but I told myself they were mistakes. Like we make both, but learn from them differently. And that was sort of a mic drop. Like, didn't really think about that.
So what's the difference between a mistake and a bad decision?
The basic thing is, was there intent or not intent? That's where you can start. And so look at that. Like, Was it just a mistake? Somebody forgot to change a number or something, whatever it was, like without the intent, or was there actually intent put into this? And then maybe, it wasn't escalated correctly, or, resulting is a big problem sometimes, which Andy Duke talks about, where, okay, we look at the result of the decision, not the actual decision, and grade it on that.
So the what versus the how.
Yeah, the what versus the how. And accountability is sometimes equated with punishment. We want to hold people accountable, where accountability is just about ownership. Like, if I make this decision, am I willing to be held accountable? Like, I read all these codes of conduct when I talk to companies before I share my story to work it into my story. The codes of conduct always have, here's some questions to ask yourself if you're not sure. Is it ethical? Is it within the company's values? But rarely does it say, if I employee make this decision, am I willing to be held accountable with the outcome? Am I willing to own it? That could slow a lot of this down. Don't ask yourself 10 questions. Ask yourself one question.
And it sounds like, too, that it's even these smaller moments, like you're saying. It's not these grandiose, giant whistleblower things. That it's like having the space to say, hey, is there anything that people are worried about here? I mean, when I worked as a management consultant at Oliver Wyman, we had to send an email on our BlackBerry every day to our partner on the case we worked on. And you had to say, what did you accomplish? Your plan for tomorrow and what you're going to do, how the partner could help, and then any risks. And so it was implicit that things might be not right or could go wrong. And it also, then it was very like, oh yeah, we could just talk about the fact that there's a possibility that something is astray or off. And we could call out smoke before there was fire. But again, it was very cultural. We didn't get punished. It was in the template. It didn't feel like a courage moment, to your point. I love that you bring up the accountability, because I do think some people have called it, cancel culture and these other things, but sometimes accountability can be Latin for the worst punishment. So you're fired, you're defrocked, you lose your thing, you take away your pension. And sometimes that is, if you've done horrible things, you should face, the repercussions of that. And I'm not against that type of accountability, but that's sort of like all caps accountability. Yeah. And I think part of this accountability is it may be that there's a period of time that you don't get to do a thing, or you have to do some remedial training, or there's something else like that. But it may just be that you say, hey, here's what I did. I want to talk about it openly. Here's what I'm going to do to not do that again. And what do I need to do to make this right with other people?
Yeah, it's confusing, because sometimes a company will reach out to me and say, hey, we just want people to have accountability. And then you realize, oh, well, the employees feel like what you mean is you want to punish them. I mean, it's just like we're talking about ownership. So I think we're repeating that over and over again. You don't have to be courageous to speak up. And another thing I wanted to go back to is the ambiguity I talked about before with my story. Sometimes the boss pretended the message wasn't ambiguous. Like, don't question my communication. And then people in the middle kind of shut down conversation. Don't question the boss. And then you have this culture of silence. Well, we're not going to question the boss. Like, this ambiguity really becomes undiscussable. And then the undiscussability kind of becomes undiscussable. And then you have this culture of silence. So many times, I don't think leaders think about it so much as like the ambiguity of what you're saying. The worst thing you can do is pretend the message wasn't ambiguous. And then you have a culture of silence is also a warning sign for future.
If you're an executive or a manager of a team, and maybe you inherited a team, you're going to inherit what was normative from a prior boss or organization. So a bunch of people worked at your old hedge fund and they come over somewhere else, and you see them not opening up, or maybe you think they're not telling the truth. What do you do to help foster or to say this is different than maybe where you've worked in the past?
Yeah, I mean, with mine and others, like, we work collaborative here. I'm the boss, but I don't know everything. And, we hired you because you're very smart people. And together, we're going to have the best outcome possible. You can help me as much as I can help you. Like, it's a back and forth. It's a vulnerable leader. With my situation, and if there's other industries, which there are, where there's like either unethical stuff, happening at a competitor, that type of thing, you want to snuff it out. I think just up front, hey, nothing like that is going to happen here, right? So like, you have to be upfront. You can't be ambiguous. We know what's happening in the industry. Come to us. And that's where compliance can get actually a bigger role inside of the company. I mean, we all see it. I'm often invited to speak during the compliance training, where compliance, the chief compliance officer is a C-suite executive by name, but they often don't have any status. And so I think it's important. I tell the compliance people, like, you're chief career protector, not just like getting in the way of the commercial business. You have to be able to speak and have some power, some status with the business, and not that you're the police officer. You're just there for those questions. And there's often a stigma of like, oh my God, I have to go to compliance. Like, no, that should actually be like a normal thing to do when there's questions, when there's things happening in the industry that are kind of like...
It's not the penalty box, right? They are a useful part of making sure this can be an enduring concern.
Yeah, that's right. So I always try to empower that function more because it really is interesting people in that field. It's not just lawyers, and they really have different skill sets.
Yeah, and I think the good compliance people don't tell you whether you can or can't. They tell you how you could do it in a compliant manner. Right. My friends that are lawyers and HR people are similar in this regard. They said the worst thing you can do is involve us too late.
Yep.
An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So again, leverage these resources. And then I do think, you mentioned a really important part is modeling the imperfection. We had recently a town hall at my company, and we didn't set up the year like we typically do with certain objectives and measures. We had a few of them, but not completely. Mm-hmm. And it's been off, right? And ultimately there's a bunch of different reasons for that. But I had to say, we didn't do this like we've done it the last 4 years and how best practices and how we model to other customers. So we're resetting at the middle of the year, and we're going to restart the year July 1st, and we're going to have a whole town hall about it. But ultimately this is because of me. But I didn't say I'm a horrible executive and, I'm going to resign and all this stuff. I said, but look, this wasn't done properly for a lot of sort of good reasons, but it doesn't matter. The result was dysfunctional. And so kind of cleaning up that mess, I think I try to just model those things that if it's okay for me to be imperfect and if it's okay for me to call myself out a bit and not overly mea culpa anything, but just to, again, take that ownership. This didn't happen, so I'm making it happen now. And here's how we're going to avoid that happening in the future. And here's what your part in that is. I got great feedback to say, hey, it's nice to see you be transparent about your challenges and imperfections as well. So I do think that modeling of that as well, because I think there is a sense the higher up we go, we try to look like there's no mistakes or nothing wrong. When in reality, if you talk to anyone on the inside at the highest levels, they all are quite imperfect and faking it till they make it sometimes or hanging on, et cetera. So I think that sort of candor and vulnerability also helps with the information asymmetry.
And that's the right kind of vulnerability, not the performative one, like you mentioned, like falling on your sword, like that type of thing. And the higher up you go, you can be less in touch, with what's happening.
We talked about courage, trust, being forthright, judgment, risk, incentives, a lot of things. I like to ask our guests, what's going to be sticky from you in what we discussed today?
I mean, the question that I wish I'd asked myself at my desk way back then, and the one now I use with not only executives I speak with, but my 2 teenage daughters, is what would you tomorrow want you today to do? And it pulls you out of the pressure of the moment and kind of makes you your own advisor. Because the shortcut, and my kids see it, business people see it, the shortcut always feels reasonable in the moment, but tomorrow always comes, as I found out the hard way, and you want to be proud of the story you're writing.
I had a mentor once say, you want to think about an email you send or a recording of a meeting, and would you want that in the Wall Street Journal? Does that represent who you are? And it kind of has a much higher level of conduct for when I am fired up about an email. I try to not email when I'm angry or if it's dark outside. And so to let that sleep or have the draft or get it off my chest. So I think that's very sticky. And I think, one of the things that's sticky for me is the media will sensationalize and hype up these things. And there certainly was a lot of drama and risk and everything you went through. But it started in these very small moments, executing that trade order after talking to someone at lunch, after watching someone else do a thing, after having the ambiguous, there's just these little breadcrumbs versus a big bang moment. And I think that we have to be vigilant about noticing those breadcrumbs along the way. Would you agree with that?
That's right. And if you read my book or listen to this and you're like, that would never be me, then you're more susceptible to actually starting to step across your own line. So I think, I don't know if healthy paranoia, that's something I've been using as the right term, but just to be hypervigilant, I think is the right point. What could I picture in my mind? What situation could I be in where I might start stepping across a line? And so when it comes, you sort of have that muscle memory, you get your reps in. The best sort of thing to stop rationalization is to vocalize those and put sunlight, because when it's just outside your head and you're talking about it, then, you can steer it the right way.
Well, our final segment, Tom, is I like to ask 2 things. One, a hot take, and then the other is $10,000 advice. So you mentioned your daughters. We'll start with the advice. Your daughters are going to join the workforce. If they get into a tough situation where they have that ambiguous conversation with the boss or seeing some pressure steering, what do you want them to do in those moments? They may be early in their career. They may feel lucky to have a job in this economy. They don't want to rock the boat. This may be their big break. what's your counsel to them in those moments? And when would you want them to call you or a friend or compliance? What would you tell them, early in their career when they're feeling something might be off?
When they start, when the next 22-year-old is out there, you have to go into the workplace, I think, with your own personal set of values that supersede any place where you work, which I did. And I was just focused on how much money this year I'm going to make, where I'm going to work. You have to understand at 22 what your values are. If that message comes in from your boss, the goals change, whatever it is, you have to have, again, the reps almost anticipating like what that might look like beforehand. So when you're in the moment, like you know what to do. Now that depends on the culture of the company. Hopefully that they're supportive and that type of thing. But in the moment, you have to anticipate the pressure and the decisions you're going to make, whether it's asking clarifying questions, that type of thing. And one thing I tell anybody to watch out for, but I think about just more younger people now because I'm now sort of it's the next generation behind me. When you look at life and success, you often things add together, like my network, my work ethic, the company, they often multiply, right? So you can have enormous success. But if you introduce one bad decision, which we talked about, if you have $1 billion on everything else, but you introduce 1 0, it's gone. So think about your life, your career. What could that 0 be? High schoolers, I talk to them, and never multiply by 0.
Well, the last thing is a hot take. AI obviously is entering the workplace. And I'm curious your thoughts around how it's going to affect some of the issues we've talked about, because it may be, how people use data or how an output was created or what work was done or not done. How do you think AI may affect some of the things around people being honest in the workplace and speaking up?
Yeah, I think it can outsource decision making. I think the number one thing we could see is, the output, the LLM made this decision, not me. And just so people know, going back to our discussion on accountability, no, you make the decision. These are tools. They're great. They can replace a lot of tasks or you can do other things, but you don't outsource the decision making and the ethics to the LLM. It comes back to you.
Yeah, human in the loop and human owning the output. If you use the tool, you own the output. Well, Tom Hardin, thank you for joining The Lift. Thanks for telling your story. He's got a great book, a bunch of great media appearances. I got to watch him with Anthony Scaramucci at the 92nd Street Y, quite a character. So, Tom, thank you for joining The Lift.
Thanks for having me on, It was a pleasure.
Wow. So Tom's story is more of an action thriller than probably your average day at work. But the lessons underneath all of that drama apply to every leader listening right now. So here's how you can take this episode and turn it into action. 1, reward the behaviors you want in your organization. If the people who bend the rules or hide the truth are the ones getting promoted, that's your real culture. Instead, reward people who raise their hand, who tell the truth, and take ownership. 2, personally model imperfection and accountability before you ask it of others. Own your part. Name something that went wrong. Talk about your role in it, what you're going to do next. Take that ownership, model the accountability, and the behavior will duplicate out. And finally, make raising concerns ordinary and routine. Build it into the process, daily check-ins, weekly reports. It doesn't matter what it is. Just always be asking, what could go wrong? What are we worried about? What are we unsure about? Design it into the flow of work so it naturally surfaces and doesn't require courage or awkwardness for people to speak up. Thanks for joining me this week on The Lift. For more info on what you heard in today's episode, visit our show notes. You can find out more about the show at theliftpod.com. If listening to The Lift today was a good use of your time, please share it with a colleague, a friend, I don't know, your ex, your mother, anyone. Don't let good advice die with you. And for those of you who like to earn a little bit of extra credit, leave a comment on Spotify. We'd love to hear from you. The Lift is produced and edited by the team at Edit Audio. This episode was produced by Victoria Marin and edited by Ali Sirwa. Our production manager is Kathleen Speckert. Our executive producer is Steph Colburn. A special thanks to some pilot crew members, including Derek Sampson, Allison Rinaldi, and Beth Gatzik. And of course, one of our super fans, Jen Fox, and my mom, Sue.